Subscribe now and press the bell icon so you never miss an emotional story that touches your heart. The morning sun cast golden rays over the historic palace grounds as tourists gathered with cameras ready. Among them stood Marcus Chen, 32-year-old software developer from California, who had saved for 3 years to visit London. He had always dreamed of seeing the famous royal guards and their magnificent horses up close. The majestic black horse stood perfectly still, its rider sitting tall in the traditional red uniform and bearskin hat. Marcus felt his heart race with excitement as he approached the designated viewing area. The palace courtyard buzzed with energy as hundreds of visitors snapped photos and whispered in awe. Children pointed at the guards while parents tried to keep them from getting too close. Marcus noticed a small group of teenagers laughing and taking selfies near one of the mounted guards. He watched as they posed and made funny faces, careful to maintain the respectful distance marked by the painted white lines on the cobblestones. The atmosphere felt festive, yet respectful, a perfect balance between tourism and tradition. Marcus had read online about the strict protocols surrounding the royal guards. He knew they were real soldiers performing an important duty, not actors or entertainers. The information boards near the entrance clearly stated the rules about maintaining distance and not touching the horses or guards. Despite this knowledge, Marcus felt an overwhelming urge to get a truly unique photo. He wanted something different from the standard tourist shots his friends back home would expect. His social media followers were waiting for content, and he wanted to give them something extraordinary. The horse that caught his attention was particularly beautiful. Its coat gleamed in the sunlight, and its presence commanded respect. The guard atop the horse remained motionless, eyes fixed forward, embodying centuries of military tradition. Marcus moved closer, his phone held high, trying different angles for the perfect shot. Other tourists around him maintained proper distance, content with their photos from the designated areas. But Marcus felt that these regular photos lacked the impact he desired. He wanted proximity, drama, and a story to tell, as he edged closer to the white boundary line. Marcus noticed the horse's ear twitch slightly. The animal was clearly aware of the crowd around it, despite appearing calm and composed. Marcus thought about how impressive these horses must be to stand so still amid chaos and noise. He admired their training and discipline. Yet in his admiration, he began to rationalize crossing boundaries. Just one step closer, he thought. Just one special photo that would make his trip memorable. His judgment became clouded by the desire for social media validation. A security officer standing nearby watched the crowd carefully. Her job was to ensure visitor safety and protect both the guards and their horses. She had worked at the palace for 7 years and had seen countless tourists make poor decisions. Most visitors were respectful and followed the rules without issue. However, there were always a few who believed the rules did not apply to them. She noticed Marcus inching closer and made a mental note to keep an eye on him. Her experience told her that tourists who gradually pushed boundaries often ended up causing problems. Marcus glanced around and saw that other tourists were occupied with their own photos. The guard remained still as a statue, which Marcus interpreted as permission to get slightly closer. He did not understand that the guard's stillness was professional duty, not approval. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped over the white line, moving into the restricted zone. His heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He raised his phone, ready to capture what he believed would be the photo of a lifetime. The horse sensed the boundary violation immediately. Its training allowed it to distinguish between appropriate visitor behavior and potential threats. The animal's muscles tensed slightly, though most observers would not notice such a subtle change. The guard atop the horse also registered the intrusion through years of experience and peripheral awareness. Marcus focused entirely on his phone screen, failed to notice these warning signs. He moved even closer, now just an arm's length from the powerful animal. Other tourists began to notice Marcus's behavior. Some looked concerned, while others simply watched with curiosity to see what would happen. A few pulled out their own cameras, sensing that something interesting might unfold. The security officer started moving in Marcus's direction, but she was dealing with a family who had questions about the changing of the guard ceremony. She tried to politely excuse herself, knowing she needed to intervene before the situation escalated. Meanwhile, Marcus reached out his hand, planning to touch the horse's neck for what he imagined would be an incredible selfie. The moment Marcus's fingers made contact with the horse's neck, everything changed in an instant. The animal reacted with the speed and power of a trained military mount. It tossed its head sharply to the side, nearly knocking Marcus off balance. The sudden movement startled him so badly that he dropped his phone, which clattered onto the ancient cobblestones. Gasps rippled through the crowd of tourists who had been watching. Some people screamed while others jumped back instinctively, even though they were already at a safe distance. The guard's voice boomed across the courtyard with authority that made everyone freeze. His words were clear and commanding, a sharp warning that echoed off the palace walls. Marcus stumbled backward, his face turning pale as the reality of his mistake crashed down on him. The professional soldier atop the horse maintained perfect control of his mount, while simultaneously making it absolutely clear that boundaries had been violated. This was not entertainment. This was not a theme park. This was a working military post with real consequences for disrespectful behavior. Security personnel converged on the scene within seconds. The officer who had been watching Marcus earlier arrived first, her expression stern and disappointed. 2 additional guards appeared from nearby posts, moving with practiced efficiency. Marcus stood frozen, his hands trembling as he realized the magnitude of his error. The horse had calmed but remained alert, its training preventing any further reaction despite the obvious provocation. The mounted guard continued his duty, eyes forward, having delivered his warning and trusting his colleagues to handle the situation. Tourists around the area whispered and pointed. Cameras that had been focused on the picturesque scene now captured Marcus's embarrassment. His face burned with shame as he understood that his moment of poor judgment would likely be shared. Across social media platforms worldwide, the irony was crushing. He'd wanted a viral photo, and now he would indeed go viral, but as an example of what not to do. Children in the crowd looked confused. While their parents used the incident as a teaching moment about respecting rules and boundaries, the security officer addressed Marcus firmly but professionally. She explained that he had violated clearly posted regulations designed to protect both visitors and the working animals. The horses, despite their impressive training, were living creatures that could react unpredictably if startled or threatened. His actions had not only endangered himself but potentially other tourists nearby. Marcus listened with his head down, fully aware that he had no excuse. The signs had been clear. The rules had been explained. He'd simply chosen to ignore them for the sake of a photograph. Other tourists began to disperse, though many continued to watch from a distance. The incident had disrupted the peaceful atmosphere that had existed just moments before. Tour guides gathered their groups and moved them along, using the opportunity to remind everyone about proper behavior around the guards and horses. The palace staff worked efficiently to restore normalcy, but the tension in the air remained palpable. Marcus felt dozens of eyes on him, each gaze adding to his growing sense of regret and humiliation. The security officer retrieved Marcus's dropped phone and handed it to him. Remarkably, it had survived the fall with only minor scratches on the case. She then asked him to follow her to the security office where proper documentation of the incident would be completed. Marcus nodded silently, not trusting himself to speak. His dream vacation had turned into a nightmare in the span of 30 seconds. He thought about his friends and family back home, about how he would have to explain this embarrassing moment. The special photo he had wanted would never exist, replaced instead by the memory of his worst decision. As they walked toward the security office, Marcus caught glimpses of other tourists continuing to enjoy their visits properly. They took photos from appropriate distances, smiled at the guards respectfully, and followed all the posted guidelines. It seemed so simple now. Why had he thought he was special or different? Why had he believed the rules did not apply to him? These questions swirled in his mind as shame and regret battled for dominance in his emotions. He had disrespected a proud tradition and potentially frightened a noble animal. The weight of his actions pressed down on him heavily inside the security office. Marcus was asked to provide his identification and contact information. The officer explained that while he would not be arrested, the incident would be officially recorded. Depending on the severity assessment, he might face a fine or even be banned from visiting royal properties in the future. Marcus listened to each word with growing dread. His foolish moment of boundary crossing could have lasting consequences that extended far beyond today's embarrassment. He thought about the money he had saved, the vacation days he had used, and how this single mistake had tainted what should have been a wonderful experience. The security office felt smaller than it actually was, as Marcus sat across from Officer Patricia Hayes. She had seen countless incidents during her years at the palace, but something about this situation struck her differently. Marcus was not a rowdy teenager trying to impress friends or a drunk tourist looking for trouble. He was a grown man who had made a thoughtful but ultimately foolish decision. Patricia could see genuine remorse in his eyes, not the defensive anger or dismissive attitude she often encountered. This recognition did not excuse his behavior, but it changed the tone of their conversation. Patricia explained the incident report process while Marcus listened carefully. She described how the palace took these violations seriously, because they involved the safety of irreplaceable animals and highly trained guards. The horses were not props or decorations. They were working military animals with years of specialized training. Each one represented a significant investment of time, resources, and tradition. When tourists disrespected these boundaries, they disrespected an entire institution that had served the country for centuries. Marcus absorbed every word, feeling his shame deepen with each fact she shared. While Patricia processed the paperwork, she asked Marcus what had motivated his decision to cross the boundary. He struggled to articulate an answer that did not sound completely ridiculous. How could he explain that social media validation had seemed more important than common sense? That he had wanted to impress people he barely knew with a photo that would be forgotten in days? Hearing his own reasoning spoken aloud made Marcus realize how hollow and superficial his priorities had become. He had traveled thousands of miles to experience history and culture, only to reduce it to content for strangers on the internet. Patricia shared a story from earlier in her career. A young woman had also crossed the barrier to touch a guard's horse, but that situation had ended much worse. The startled horse had reared up, and the woman had fallen backward, breaking her wrist and suffering a concussion. The incident had traumatized both the visitor and complicated the horse's training for months afterward. Legal proceedings had followed, insurance claims had been filed, and the woman's vacation had ended in a hospital. Patricia told the story not to frighten Marcus, but to help him understand the potential consequences of what seemed like a harmless action. The reality check hit Marcus hard. He had been incredibly fortunate. The horse could have reacted more violently. He could have been seriously injured. Other tourists, including children, could have been caught in the chaos. His desire for a memorable photo could have resulted in actual harm to innocent people. The thought made his stomach turn. He looked at Patricia with new understanding and expressed gratitude that the situation had not escalated. Beyond a warning and documentation, she acknowledged his response with a slight nod, appreciating that the lesson seemed to be landing. After completing the basic paperwork, Patricia made an unexpected offer. She asked if Marcus would be willing to speak with the mounted guard whose horse he had approached. The guard, Corporal James Mitchell, had finished his shift and wanted to address the situation directly. Marcus felt his anxiety spike at the prospect, but agreed immediately. He owed the man an apology, and running from that responsibility would only add cowardice to his list of mistakes. Patricia led him through several corridors to a small meeting room where Corporal Mitchell waited in his uniform. Corporal Mitchell stood as they entered, his posture straight and his expression serious, but not hostile. He was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess everything at once. Patricia made brief introductions and then stepped out to give them privacy, though she remained just outside the door. The silence in the room felt heavy as Marcus struggled to find the right words. Finally, he simply said what needed to be said. He apologized directly, taking full responsibility for his actions without making excuses or trying to minimize what he had done. The corporal listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, there was a long pause before James spoke. His voice was firm but not angry as he explained what the incident had looked like from his perspective. He described feeling Marcus's approach, sensing the boundary violation, and watching his training kick in automatically. He talked about his horse, a mare named Duchess, who had served for 6 years without incident until today. James explained that these animals trusted their handlers completely, that violations like Marcus's could damage that trust. The bond between soldier and horse was sacred in the cavalry. Built on mutual respect and reliability, Marcus listened with complete attention, understanding for the first time the full scope of his impact. This was not just about breaking a rule or creating a scene. He had interfered with a working partnership that represented years of dedication and training. James continued, explaining that he was not personally angry, but disappointed that an adult had chosen to disregard clear warnings. He emphasized that the rules existed not to spoil tourist fun, but to maintain safety and operational integrity. Marcus found himself nodding, accepting every word as deserved criticism of his poor judgment and entitled behavior. Corporal Mitchell paused in his explanation and gestured for Marcus to sit down. The formality of the moment eased slightly as both men took seats across from each other. James leaned forward with his hands clasped, his expression shifting from stern to thoughtful. He asked Marcus a direct question that cut through all the superficial aspects of the incident. Why had a seemingly intelligent person made such an obviously poor choice? The question was not rhetorical. James genuinely wanted to understand the thinking that led tourists to repeatedly violate boundaries. Despite clear warnings and visible consequences, Marcus took a deep breath and decided to be completely honest. He talked about the pressure he felt to document every moment of his trip. He described how social media had transformed travel from a personal experience into a performance for others. Every meal needed to be photographed. Every landmark required the perfect selfie. Every experience had to be shared immediately, or it somehow felt less real. He explained how this constant need for validation had gradually warped his judgment until getting a unique photo seemed more important than respecting rules. Speaking these truths aloud made Marcus feel exposed and foolish, but also strangely relieved. James listened carefully, his expression showing recognition rather than judgment. He shared his own observations from working at the palace for 4 years. He had watched tourism change dramatically with the rise of smartphones and social media. Visitors used to come to experience history, to feel connected to tradition, to simply be present in a special place. Now many seem to experience the palace only through their phone screens, more concerned with how their visit would look online than with what they were actually seeing. He described tourists walking backward while filming, families arguing over photo poses, and people becoming genuinely upset. When guards would not break protocol for their pictures, the conversation deepened as both men explored this cultural shift. Marcus admitted that he had barely looked at the palace architecture before the incident. He had been so focused on getting content that he had forgotten to actually enjoy his visit. James noted that this pattern was not unique to Marcus. Security regularly dealt with tourists who created problems. Because they were more engaged with documenting their visit than experiencing it, the irony was profound. People traveled great distances and spent significant money to visit places they barely saw because they were too busy trying to prove they were there. James then surprised Marcus by showing some empathy. He acknowledged that the pressure to present a perfect life online was real and often overwhelming. He had friends who struggled with the same issues, constantly comparing themselves to others and feeling inadequate when their photos did not get enough likes or comments. The corporal admitted that military life had somewhat shielded him from these pressures, but he understood their power. This acknowledgement made Marcus feel less alone in his mistake. He was not uniquely foolish. He was simply another person who had let external validation override internal judgment. The conversation shifted when James asked what Marcus planned to do with this experience. Would it be just an embarrassing story to eventually laugh about, or would it prompt genuine reflection and change? Marcus sat with the question for a long moment. He realized that he could choose how this incident shaped him moving forward. He could dismiss it as bad luck, or harsh enforcement of silly rules. Or he could accept it as a wake-up call about his priorities and behavior. The choice would define whether this remained simply a humiliating mistake, or became a catalyst for positive change. Marcus made a decision in that moment. He told James that he wanted to turn this experience into something meaningful. He planned to write about it honestly, not to gain sympathy, but to encourage other travelers to be more mindful and respectful. He wanted to challenge the social media culture that had influenced his poor choice. James appreciated this commitment, but offered a word of caution. Real change required more than good intentions. It demanded consistent effort and willingness to make different choices, even when they felt uncomfortable or less impressive to others. Marcus accepted this wisdom, understanding that his journey toward better behavior was just beginning, before they concluded their conversation. James offered to show Marcus something. They walked through secured areas of the palace grounds to the stables, where the cavalry horses were kept. The building smelled of hay and leather, with shafts of afternoon light illuminating particles of dust in the air. Horses stood in spacious stalls, some eating while others rested. James led Marcus to a particular stall where a beautiful black mare watched them approach. This was Duchess, the horse Marcus had startled earlier. She was calm now, her dark eyes intelligent and observant. James explained his relationship with Duchess. He had been her primary handler for 3 years. They trained together daily, building trust through consistency and mutual respect. He described her personality, her preferences, and her remarkable ability to remain composed in chaotic situations. The bond between them was evident in how Duchess responded to James's presence, moving closer and allowing him to stroke her neck gently. Marcus watched this interaction with growing emotion. He had seen Duchess earlier as a prop in his photo attempt. Now he saw her as an individual with personality, history, and importance beyond her role in tourist pictures. James invited Marcus to stand closer to Duchess's stall, though still at a respectful distance. He explained the extensive training these horses underwent before they were trusted with ceremonial duties. The process took years and required specific temperament traits that only certain horses possessed. Duchess had shown exceptional calm and intelligence from the beginning, which was why she had been selected for the prestigious cavalry program. She could stand motionless for hours, tolerate loud noises, navigate crowds, remain composed when situations became chaotic. These were not natural horse behaviors, but carefully cultivated skills developed through patient, consistent training. Marcus listened with fascination as James described daily routines. The horses received excellent care, including specialized nutrition, regular veterinary checkups, and carefully planned exercise schedules. They worked in shifts to avoid fatigue and stress. Each animal had specific handlers who understood their individual needs and personalities. The program took their welfare seriously, recognizing that these horses were partners and athletes, not just equipment. Hearing these details made Marcus's earlier action feel even more thoughtless. He had treated a highly trained professional animal as if it were a petting zoo attraction, James asked Marcus to observe Duchess carefully. He pointed out subtle signs of her awareness and intelligence, the way her ears moved to track sounds, how her eyes followed movement without her head turning, the small shifts in her posture that indicated comfort or attention. Most tourists never noticed these details because they were too focused on getting their pictures. But these observations revealed the living, thinking being beneath the impressive exterior. Marcus found himself genuinely captivated by Duchess. For the first time during his entire trip, he was fully present and engaged with what he was experiencing rather than thinking about how to capture it. After several minutes of observation, James made an unexpected offer. He asked if Marcus would like to properly meet Duchess with appropriate supervision and respect. Marcus felt his heart race, but this time with genuine appreciation rather than selfish desire. He nodded, not trusting his voice. James opened the stall gate and invited Marcus inside, instructing him to move slowly and keep his voice quiet. They approached Duchess together, and James showed Marcus the proper way to let a horse become familiar with a new person. Marcus extended his hand slowly, allowing Duchess to sniff and investigate him on her terms. The moment felt sacred to Marcus. Duchess's soft breath on his palm, the warmth radiating from her large body, the gentle patience in her dark eyes. This was the connection he had been seeking earlier, but now it came through respect rather than entitlement. James guided Marcus's hand to Duchess's neck, showing him how to stroke with the grain of her coat. The mare tolerated the attention calmly, and Marcus felt tears unexpectedly prick his eyes. He was overwhelmed by the privilege of this moment and the grace being shown to him despite his earlier behavior. This simple interaction meant more than any photo ever could. James noticed Marcus's emotional response but said nothing, giving him space to process his feelings. They spent several more minutes with Duchess before James suggested they return to the office. As they walked back through the stables, Marcus thanked James repeatedly for the extraordinary gift of that experience. The corporal simply nodded, explaining that he wanted Marcus to understand what he had almost harmed through his thoughtlessness. Real understanding required connection, not lectures or punishment. Marcus had been given a chance to see Duchess as she truly was, and that perspective would stay with him far longer than any reprimand. Back in the security office, Officer Hayes had completed all the necessary paperwork. She reviewed the incident report with Marcus, explaining that he would receive an official warning and a fine of £200. The penalty was standard for first-time boundary violations that did not result in injury. Marcus accepted the consequences without complaint, recognizing that he was receiving relatively lenient treatment. Hayes added that the incident would be flagged in the system, meaning any future violations at royal properties would result in much harsher penalties, possibly including criminal charges. Marcus assured her that there would be no future incidents. He had learned his lesson thoroughly before Marcus left. Hayes provided him with educational materials about the royal guards and their horses. The pamphlets contained information that was freely available to all visitors, but that most people never bothered to read. She encouraged him to actually study this material, to understand the history and significance of what he had witnessed. Marcus accepted the documents gratefully, knowing he would read every word. His relationship with this place had fundamentally changed. It was no longer just a tourist attraction or photo opportunity. It represented real people doing real work with real animals, all deserving of genuine respect. As Marcus prepared to leave the security office, James appeared one final time. He handed Marcus a small card with information about the Cavalry Museum. He suggested that Marcus visit if he had time remaining in London. The museum provided deeper context about the role of horses in military history and the modern ceremonial cavalry. It would help Marcus understand the full scope of the tradition he had disrupted. Marcus accepted the card with gratitude, promising to visit before his return flight. James shook his hand firmly, a gesture that felt like forgiveness and a fresh start combined into one simple action. Marcus walked out of the palace grounds into the late afternoon sunlight feeling completely transformed. The tourist crowds continued their visits, unaware of the profound experience he had just completed. He found a quiet bench in a nearby park and sat down, needing time to process everything that had happened. His phone remained in his pocket, forgotten for the first time in days. The urge to immediately share his experience on social media was notably absent. Some moments were too important to reduce to posts and status updates. This was one of them. Over the next hour, Marcus reflected on his entire trip leading up to this moment. He realized that he had barely been present for any of it. Every meal had been photographed before being tasted. Every street scene had been viewed through a camera lens rather than directly experienced. He had accumulated hundreds of photos, but very few genuine memories. The incident with Duchess had shattered his autopilot behavior and forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his priorities. He felt gratitude for this wake-up call, even though it had come through embarrassment and consequences. The following day, Marcus visited the Cavalry Museum as James had suggested. He spent 3 hours reading exhibits, watching videos, and speaking with knowledgeable staff members. He learned about the historical role of cavalry units, the evolution of ceremonial duties, and the rigorous selection process for both horses and riders. The information deepened his appreciation for what he had witnessed and nearly damaged. He purchased several books from the museum shop, wanting to continue learning after returning home. His trip to London was being salvaged, transformed from a social media showcase into genuine education and growth. On his final day in London, Marcus made a decision that surprised him. He returned to the palace, but remained far behind the boundary lines. He watched the changing of the guard ceremony from an appropriate distance, simply observing and appreciating rather than trying to capture content. He noticed details he had missed before. The precision of the movements, the bond between handlers and horses, the dignity of the ceremony itself. Other tourists jostled around him with phones and cameras extended, but Marcus kept his device put away. He was there to witness, not to document. The experience felt richer and more meaningful than anything he had previously photographed. After the ceremony concluded, Marcus spotted Officer Hayes speaking with some visitors. He approached respectfully and thanked her again for her professionalism during his incident. She seemed pleasantly surprised to see him and asked about his remaining time in London. Marcus shared his museum visit and his changed perspective on travel and social media. Hayes smiled genuinely, noting that most people in his situation simply paid their fine and left angry. The fact that Marcus had taken the experience to heart and actively pursued growth spoke well of his character. Her validation meant more to Marcus than any social media likes ever had. Marcus returned home to California with a completely different attitude toward his life and priorities. He did eventually post about his London experience on social media, but not in the way he had originally planned. He wrote an honest account of his mistake, taking full responsibility and explaining what he had learned. He talked about the culture of constant documentation and how it had damaged his ability to be present. He shared his encounter with Duchess and James, emphasizing the importance of respecting boundaries and seeing beyond the surface of tourist attractions. The response surprised him. Many of his followers thanked him for the honest post. They shared their own stories of letting social media pressures drive poor decisions. Others admitted that they had never considered the real people and animals behind tourist attractions, seeing them only as backdrops for photos. A few people criticized Marcus for his initial behavior, which he accepted as fair. But overwhelmingly, people appreciated his vulnerability and growth. The post generated more meaningful engagement than any of his carefully curated travel photos ever had. Real honesty connected with people in ways that perfect images never could. In the months following his trip, Marcus made concrete changes to his behavior. He set strict boundaries around his phone use during experiences he wanted to truly enjoy. He practiced being present without immediately reaching for his camera. He became more thoughtful about respecting rules and boundaries, recognizing that they existed for good reasons. His friends noticed the difference in him, commenting that he seemed more grounded and content. Marcus credited his encounter with Duchess and the subsequent conversations for prompting this positive transformation. His worst moment had become his best teacher. Marcus stayed in touch with the Cavalry Museum through their newsletter and social media accounts. He followed their updates about the horses and handlers, feeling a continued connection to their work. He donated to their educational programs, wanting to support efforts that helped others learn what he had learned the hard way. On the anniversary of his incident, Marcus received an unexpected email from Corporal James Mitchell. The guard had heard about Marcus's positive changes and wanted to acknowledge his growth. James shared a recent photo of Duchess, healthy and continuing her ceremonial duties. The gesture touched Marcus deeply. Looking back on his London trip, Marcus recognized it as a turning point in his life. What should have been a disaster had become an opportunity for profound personal growth. He had learned about respect, presence, and the dangers of letting external validation drive important decisions. He had discovered that real connection came through genuine engagement, not through collecting photos for others to see. Most importantly, he had learned that mistakes could be powerful teachers if approached with humility and willingness to change. His encounter with a Royal Guards horse had taught him lessons that extended far beyond tourist etiquette into the core of how he wanted to live his life.